I am the Lord, and there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things.
Isaiah 45 is an overpowering assertion of God's sovereignty. It begins with Cyrus, the Lord's anointed, and a statement of what God will do by him and for him. Then comes what is probably the most exalted statement in the Bible about the sovereignty of God. It is utterly destructive of Arminianism. The latter verses, clear in themselves, are not to be ignored, but the middle section beggars praise. Verse 5 is only a reminder of the whole. I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God besides me. I girded thee, though thou hast not known me. It is a shame to interrupt even an incomplete quotation, but the present task is to call attention to its meaning. God girded Cyrus, though Cyrus did not know it. One must not suppose, when God girds, guides, and controls someone, that the person is aware of it. Even regeneration, as the Puritans pointed out, is not a conscious experience, much less God's control of Pharaoh, Absalom, or Cyrus. Their knowledge comes later, if at all. Then the text continues, I am the Lord, and there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. The two theses most unacceptable to the Arminians are that God is the cause of sin and that God is the cause of salvation. In both cases, the Arminians look to free will. Man is the first cause of his sin, and still independent of God, man is the first cause of his conversion. Isaiah in this verse makes Arminianism biblically impossible. The Scofield Bible is a good example of how Arminians try to escape from the plain meaning of this verse. Scofield says, Hebrew, ra, translated sorrow, wretchedness, adversity, afflictions, calamities, but never translated sin. God created evil only in the sense that he made sorrow and wretchedness, etc., to be the sure fruits of sin. Now, the most remarkable point about Scofield's note is that he told the truth when he said, Ra is never translated sin. How could he have made such a statement knowing it was true? The only answer is that he must have examined every instance of Ra in the Hebrew text, and then he must have determined that in no case did King James translate it sin. And this is absolutely true. But if he compared every instance of Ra with this translation in every case, he could not have failed to note that Ra in Genesis 6:5 and in a number of other places is translated wickedness. In fact, Ra is translated wickedness some 50 times. Scofield could not have failed to notice this. So he says with just truth, Ra is never translated sin. Since Scofield favors the word evil, a partial list of verses in which this translation occurs will be given. And second, there will be a partial list where wicked and wickedness is used. Going through the Bible, Scofield must have read as far as Genesis 2:9, 17, 3:5, 22, 6:5, The knowledge of good and evil is not simply a knowledge of sorrow or calamity. It is primarily a knowledge of disobedience and sin. Similarly, Genesis 3:5 and 22 refer as much to sin as to its punishment. In fact, Genesis 3:22 hardly refers to punishment at all. True, Adam was banished from the garden, but the word evil in the verse refers to his disobedience and sin. Whatever lame excuse can be given for excluding sin and retaining only punishment in the previous 4 verses, Genesis 6:5 is clearly and indisputably a reference to sin. God did not see adversity or affliction. He saw sinful thoughts. Ra in this verse at any rate means sin. The same is true of Genesis 8:21. In fact, sin and its punishment are separated here. God will not again curse or smite as he had just done, for man's heart is evil. The flood was a punishment, but the evil was the sinful heart of man. Toward the end of Genesis, Ra refers to an alleged theft, many sins from which the angel had redeemed Jacob, and 3 times the brothers sin against Joseph. In 50:17, again, the sin is easily distinguishable from the feared punishment. Is it necessary to plod through all the Old Testament to show that Ra often means sin as distinct from its punishment? It should not be necessary, but to show the pervasiveness of the doctrine and the perverseness of Arminianism, something from 2 Chronicles will be listed. 22:4, 29:6, 33:2. Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord. Our fathers have trespassed and done evil in the eyes of the Lord. Manasseh did evil in the sight of the Lord. He wrought much evil in the sight of the Lord. Jehoiakim did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. Evil, Ra, is not once translated sin. Very strange, but true. Then there is Isaiah 56:2, 57:1, 59:7, 15. All instances of Ra or evil. Now Scofield knew that Ra was never translated sin. He must have known that it was often translated wickedness. Wickedness or wicked, as the translation of Ra occurs in Genesis 6:5, 13:13, 38:7, also in Deuteronomy 13:11. Nor are these the only instances. Scofield told the literal truth when he said it is never translated sin, but nothing could be more false than his statement. God created evil only in the sense that he made sorrow, wretchedness, etc., to be the sure fruits of sin. The scriptural meaning of the word raw has been abundantly made clear. But there is another point too. If raw means simply external calamities, then the word peace, which God also creates, can only mean military peace. The phrases are parallel, but this interpretation reduces the verse, or this part of the verse, to trivialities. Even verse 1 can hardly be restricted to pure political matters. Verse 3 speaks of treasures of darkness, hidden riches, and the knowledge of God. Jacob my servant and Israel my elect are not phrases to be restricted to politics and economics. Verse 6 speaks of the extensions of God's knowledge throughout the world. Then comes, I make peace and create evil. Merely military peace, not peace with God? The next verses speak of righteousness dropping down from heaven, not like dew, but like pouring rain, bringing forth salvation. Let righteousness spring up together. I, the Lord, have created it. O Arminian, Arminian, thou that distortest the prophet, and misrepresentest them that are sent unto thee, how often have I told your children the plain truth, and ye would not let them understand? There is still more in this chapter from Isaiah. Once again we find the potter and the clay. It indicates that God is not responsible to man. Woe to the man who complains that God has made him or anyone else a vessel of dishonor. The clay has no rights against the potter, nor does it have any free will to decide what sort of bowl or jug it shall be. The dark, unpleasant side of the doctrine, precisely because it is unpleasant, is offensive to human pride. But the two sides are sides of the same coin. God is sovereign in mercy also. After stressing God's creative power in 45:12, Isaiah continues, I have raised him, Cyrus, up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. This applies to all that Cyrus did. Of course, Isaiah, who made the prediction, and the devout Jews who fulfilled it, were chiefly interested in Cyrus's treatment of them. But God directed Cyrus in all the details of his empire, and in all the details of his private life. Gordon H. Clark, Predestination, the combined edition of Biblical Predestination and Predestination in the Old Testament, pages 184 through 188.